Mr. Speaker, in short, this is a bill regarding consent searches that is probably familiar to most of my colleagues that have been here any amount of time. Back in 2020, previous to 2020, police officers in this state, when they stopped a vehicle for a motor vehicle violation, could ask the operator, may I search your vehicle? They could do that for any reason they wanted, or no reason at all, quite frankly, which is probably not good public policy. And in 2020, this legislature made a change and said police officers who stop a vehicle for a motor vehicle violation can no longer ask for consent under any circumstances. And I think that there is common ground. I think that there is fair, reasonable, and good public policy. And in fact, back in 2021, in a vote in the Judiciary Committee, many of my colleagues at that time agreed with me. In fact, this language came out of that committee 32-6, significant bipartisan support. This bill did not have a public hearing this year because despite it being introduced by numerous people, was not raised for a public hearing, but it has had multiple public hearings in years past. And what it does is it says that when a police officer stops somebody for a motor vehicle violation and they have reasonable suspicion, so let's just talk about that for a second. Under current law, from case law for years and years, when a police officer stops a vehicle and there's probable cause of that there's criminal activity or contraband or evidence of a crime in the vehicle, they can search the car based upon that standard of probable cause. Reasonable suspicion is a lower standard that we use in statutes. For example, 54102J is an example where we use that lower standard. So what the amendment allows is for a police officer who meets that lower standard can ask for consent. And if the operator says, no, you cannot search my vehicle, they cannot. So it's a middle ground from where we were prior to 2020 and where we are today that I think is reasonable. And I have a couple examples. So for example, if a police officer today stops a vehicle and in the back seat is a Sawzall and some Sawzall blades, well, that's not probable cause to search a car. But if the police officer knows that there's been catalytic converter thefts in that area recently, it should be enough for him to ask a few more questions, like, may I search your trunk? Certainly if the operator says no, that's his right, there's no search, but at least he can continue his investigation and ask that question. Another example is the use of crack cocaine. When somebody sees a little rose and some chore boy in a car, not probable cause. But to a trained police officer, that's evidence of narcotic activity, and they should be able to ask. The language, Mr. Speaker, takes it one step further. And it says that the police officer who asks for consent, anytime he or she asks for consent, whether it's granted or not, has to do a report. And has to say in the report the reasonable suspicion that led them to ask for consent. And naturally, according to current law, this is all on body cam. Mr. Speaker,
Representative Howard, can you just hold on just a second? Excuse me, everyone. Let's quiet down in the chamber, please. Please allow the representative to make his point. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I have spent my 5 years here using my 23 years of police experience before that to understand the concerns that led to the banning of consent searches in 2020. And I've worked thoughtfully with my colleagues and advocates and a lot of individuals to come up with what I think is good public policy. It allows our police officers to do their job so they're not hamstrung as they are today, but it puts appropriate safeguards to avoid what I think the legislature sought to avoid back in 2020. I think this is good public policy. I think it's a fair, reasonable, middle ground amendment. I urge my colleagues to support it. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move adoption, and I would ask when the vote be taken, it be taken by roll.
The clerk will please announce the tally.
House Amendment Schedule B, total voting 142, necessary for adoption 72, those voting A 63, those voting A 79, absent on voting 9.
The amendment fails.